Next, let's talk about how peers influence development. A friendship is a voluntary relationship between two people involving mutual liking. We see that friendships differ as people develop throughout the lifespan. The key elements of friendships for younger children are that they like each other, they enjoy playing together. In early childhood, you might make or break a friendship several times during the course of a day. Oh, you took that toy from me, you're not my friend. Now you've given the toy back again, so you're my friend. But now you took the cookie that I wanted to eat, so you're not my friend. So this is an example of how friendships here in early childhood, they fluctuate quite a bit. So preschoolers are going to choose friends based on common interests and if they get along well. In middle childhood, from around 8 to 11, relationships start to become a little bit more stable. But we see that they're still based on common interests, but there's also these psychological characteristics related to them, like trust and helpfulness. So in middle childhood, if there's a breach of trust, like you find out someone was gossiping about you, or there was a broken promise, or you asked a friend for help and they didn't help you, this can often be a deal breaker for kids in middle childhood. So not having that trust and assistance can cause a friendship to end. Then with adolescence, we see that, again, your friends are based on mutual liking. They're also based on these psychological characteristics of trust and helpfulness. But we add another layer of complexity to friendships in adolescence. So trust becomes even more important in adolescent friendships. And we also see that the emergence of intimacy in adolescent friendships means that friends come to be seen as these sources of social and emotional support. So hand in hand with intimacy is loyalty. So if you feel that a friend isn't being loyal, this could also cause a friendship to end. So intimacy is very important, especially for girls. So I'd like you guys to just think a little bit about who are friends, and do you think all friends are good for kids? It really depends on whether or not all kids are good for friends. So friends tend to be similar in age. They tend to be the same sex or from the same race or ethnic group, although that's less true if the child's school or neighborhood is ethnically diverse. We see that cross-group friendships are very helpful because cross-group friendships help the majority group children form more positive attitudes toward a minority group. So this can be a really good thing. So when it comes to friends, it's really more about birds of a feather flocking together rather than opposites attract. So friends have similar interests, similar attitudes towards school, similar recreational pursuits, future plans, and drug use. So you really learn a lot about how to act from your friends. We see that aggressive kids will model and encourage aggressive behavior in their friends. So this would be one instance where not all friends are necessarily good for kids. In some relationships, an aggressive friend might encourage submissiveness in another as well. So you definitely tend to hang out with friends who are similar to you. Like aggressive kids learn more about being aggressive. Pro-social kids, they're going to hang out with other kids who are pro-social. And so they get rewarded for helping out, for being kind, for being compassionate. So children with good friends experience a lot of benefits. They have higher self-esteem, they're less likely to be lonely or depressed, they act more pro-socially, and they can also cope with stresses easier. We know that children with good friendships have really learned the value of cooperation here. They've also been able to kind of peer inside the minds of others. And this is an example of how social development is related to cognitive development, because here they're forming these friendships. They're starting to learn how to read people better. And so this makes possible persuasion or compromise. So because of these gains, we see that peer contact contributes to perspective taking and understanding of self and others. So school-age children can resolve conflicts more effectively using persuasion and compromise. Sometimes friends spend a lot of their time discussing each other's problems. This is known as co-rumination. This is very common in girl friendships. We see that it strengthens girls' friendships. Unfortunately, it also puts them at risk for greater depression and anxiety. Hopefully everyone knows what I mean by co-rumination, or you've experienced it before. I know when I was in college, we were having a lot of problems on our softball team with our coach. And we would always, me and my teammates, we'd get so frustrated, and we would just sit there and we could talk about this stuff. I mean, we could talk about our coach for hours. And it's like you finish up one issue that you have with her, and then it's like, okay, let's circle back to the issue, to another issue, right? So this is known as co-rumination, you guys. We see that there are some risks to friendships. So again, not all kids are good for friendships, or not all friendships are good for kids. If a child's very aggressive children often encourage each other's aggressive behavior. And so teens who are engaging in risky behavior often reinforce each other's risky behavior as well. So these are examples where not all friendships are good for kids. So let's talk about friend groups. Let's define some terms first. So a peer group is a social structure that has both leaders and followers. It generates unique values for the group and standards of behaving, standards of behavior in keeping with those standards. This is evidenced by a group identity. So think about peer groups, maybe from middle school or high school, or if you've seen the movie Mean Girls, this is a great example of different peer groups. So older children and adolescents often form cliques. So cliques are the smaller groups of like-minded children or adolescents who are friends, and they tend to be similar in age, sex, race, and attitudes. So again, in the movie Mean Girls, like when she comes into the cafeteria, or maybe even when you were in high school, in the cafeteria, there's like different tables that are associated with each clique. So a crowd then is a larger mixed-sex group of older children or adolescents who have similar values and attitudes, and they're known by a common label. So some crowds have higher status than others. Members of higher status crowds often have higher self-esteem compared to members of lower status crowds. So when parents practice authoritative parenting, their children become involved with crowds that endorse adult standards of behavior. So when their parents' style is neglectful or permissive, children are less likely to identify with adult standards of behavior, and then they might join crowds that have more negative behaviors like drinking or drugs. So I'd like you just to think a little bit more about the peer groups that you remember from middle school. Think about, how did they dress? Where did they hang out? What did they do? Common to most groups, we see there's a dominance hierarchy, and this is just a well-defined structure that's headed by a leader to whom all other members of the group defer. So physical power and individual traits that relate to the group's main function are typically what determine the hierarchy. So, if there's a group and it's like the jocks group, typically the leader of the group might be the person literally with the most physical power. So the tallest and the strongest of the group, the person who excels in sports the best. When children are no longer respected, they're typically excluded from the group. And then they might have to turn to other low status peers who have poor social skills. And this isn't good because it reduces their opportunities to acquire more socially competent behavior as well.